So, welcome to Season of Change, transforming your life by the power in the Word of God. I am your host, Evangelist Joseph Jeremiah, and it's always been a nice one on Season of Change podcast. You know, when we're talking about Season of Change, we're talking about igniting hope. We're talking about transformative life. We're talking about renewing hope. We're talking about bringing people back to life. And I want every one of us to know that our transformation begins from within. The transformation begins from within. So, and on this episode, we have our guest from United States of America, a podcast host, TV personality, and let me call her a coach. And at the same time, she's a counselor. She will be talking to us. We'll be discussing about her book, but she's on a mission to save marriages, and she have about 15 steps to heal from trauma. But though we are not going, we'll be talking about those things little by little, but we are here to discuss about our book, Flipping the Iceberg. There is a new book that she published 15 on the May of this year. And there's a new book. The book is on sales, so you can order for the book. You can get your copy in order to enjoy a good transformation. She's a mother, a good woman, blessed with children. So quickly, let me just say it, Christian Walker, can you please just tell us about your brief about your background?
Well, I am the mother of 6, and I only had 4 at the time, and I found myself laying in the bed in this fetal position, just bawling my eyes out because I had just said goodbye to my children for the first time as they went away with their dad for the weekend without me. And I had realized that the title of wife was no longer part of my life. So I just laid there just thinking I was a failure because I never thought I'd be divorced. And it was a couple years later where I was having a conversation with my daughter, and she had been heartbroken by somebody. And she goes, I just don't get it. You know, why does this person act so that everyone thinks he's Mr. Wonderful when he walks into a room? But to me, he just continually lets me down. And so I developed this concept called the iceberg. And with the iceberg, basically 10% you see above the water, 90% is below the water. So if you can flip the iceberg, then you can get to know a person. But what I then realized is I was very broken when I got married. I was only 19. And so I didn't understand what marriage meant. I didn't understand all the different things that affected me in my life that ended up ruining my marriage. And it definitely was not just me, but I realized that had I been a healthier person, I probably never would have married that person. Because on my wedding day, I literally heard somebody say, get up and run. And so I made a wrong decision, try to make it work for 15 years. And so during that time, I'd started teaching college at 22. I then became a dean. I opened up a college, and I managed several different colleges in the Valley. And I love to travel. I'm a real estate agent, and I'm a real estate investor. We've taken ourselves from being $400,000 on the whole to being able to own multiple properties and have a real estate portfolio that helps us every single month. And so I love to learn, and I love to have my hands in different things. And because of all these different experiences I've had, I love to coach people. And my biggest mission in life is to help people find peace and their passion. So that's why I have a podcast. That's why I coach. That's why I wrote my book, because I just want people to be successful.
Wow, that's great. And I believe you're making a great move to achieve or to actualize your mission or that you're pursuing. That's a great one. So the first questions, you briefly answered part of it, because the first question I want to ask you about what inspired you in writing your book, Flipping the Iceberg. But you've talked about it a bit, so I will move maybe you still have more to say about it.
Well, I do. Yeah.
Sorry.
What was that?
Just tell us the story behind your book. What inspired your writing the book, The Flip of the Iceberg? Thank you.
Yeah, so when like I said, when I got married, I didn't realize what marriage meant. You know, it's a commitment, and making sure that I kept, as I was engaged, I kept thinking no. And I think I was not the nicest person, hoping that my fiance would break off the marriage. He never did. And then kneeling across the altar and hearing the words, Charisse, get up and run, I look around and I thought it was my dad, and it wasn't. There's nobody around me. And so I knew for a fact that I should not be marrying him, but I did anyway. And so going through that whole marriage, I didn't even realize until the end, I had been diagnosed with MS because of the stress, and it's multiple sclerosis is what it's called, because of the stress that I was under. I mean, I had the spinal taps and everything, and it came out positive. And so I finally sat down with my husband and I said, look, I need you to step up. I had heart surgery on a Friday. I was back to work on a Monday. I mean, my body was literally shutting down. And so I said, I can't continue to support the family. I was the breadwinner while he did not work. And so it's just, I could not keep going with the 4 kids and everything else. I was opening up a college at the time. And so we ended up, finally, enough is enough. We made this contract. He broke it. And so I decided for the first time in my marriage to stand up for myself and say enough is enough. And so I said, let's separate, which we did for 8 months. And the whole time, everyone's like, what's your problem? Like, even my grandma said, Charisse, if you would just quit your job, he would step up. And I said to her, I said, Grandma, if I quit my job, we'd be homeless. And so many people did not believe me. And it wasn't until, I mean, still to this day, he doesn't have a job and he lives with his parents. And so people don't understand what goes on behind closed doors. And so that's this iceberg that, you don't know in somebody else's situation. And it was actually 6 months after the divorce was final, I was retested for MS and it was gone. So that shows you the power of stress and what it can do to a person. And so I really don't think I'd still be alive if that happened. And so that really, flipping the iceberg, realizes there's 2 secrets. The first one is that you have to be healed yourself. There's traumas that we all experience in life. And I look at a trauma kind of like an iceberg sitting in that water, waiting to tear into your relationship. So if you are not healthy yourself, you cannot make a healthy decision. So we talk about how to overcome codependency. We talk about how to listen to your intuition. We talk about not giving into peer pressure, which would be from your family. And the second one is, once you are healthy and you're contemplating marriage with somebody, now your job is to flip their iceberg and get to know them as much as possible. And so that's where the second part, the other steps are to really get to know who they are. And so they go through a series of questions.
Wow, that's great. So how did your personal life, marriage, and divorce influence the concept in your book?
Say that again. How do I what?
How did your personal life, your personal experience, so how did your personal experience with marriage and divorce influence the concept in your book?
So I realized, like I said, that I didn't know who I was, and then I didn't really know who he was. There was a time, I remember I referred to him as Ken, Barbie and Ken. This is before the Barbie movie came out. I was writing this book. And he was standing up on this podium and he was singing, and he's an incredibly good looking man. And so I leaned to my friend and I said, who is that? And she kind of rolled her eyes. She's like, oh, we'll just say Ken. And, again, it comes to intuition. And I dismissed that roll of her eyes and realized later, I mean, she grew up with him. She knew who he really was. She went to school with him. And had I really thought about that and said, what do you mean by that? She probably would have told me. And like I said, we're friends to this day. We just cannot live together. And as I keep things on the surface level, we get along. If I go underneath that, it's not a good thing. So for me, it's all about what my experience was in marriage. And then even the second marriage, I had this feeling while we were dating, we were engaged. And a month before we got married, I had this feeling, break it off, like just give it a month. And I said, no, no, no. And a whole bunch of stuff happened. And so I felt like, yes, I know that I made the right decision the second time. And we've been married for 13 years. But the first 6 weeks of our marriage, well, 6 weeks was bliss. Then something happened at week 6, and it took us a year and a half to recover. And so those two experiences, I realized I have children, and my kids are of the age, the older 4, that they could be getting married anytime. And I do not want them to make the same mistakes I did. So everything that I experienced, it's like, don't do what I did. And here's what I learned from that. And so I hope really that my own daughters and my sons make the choices so that they can have a lasting marriage.
Wow, that's great. So what are some keys, or what are some key lessons you learned during your journey from trauma to triumph?
So the key lessons, okay, so here's the book, right? And my key lessons are that I listen to your intuition. What I didn't know and what I learned while writing the book is that your gut, your heart, and your brain are all interconnected. So if you've ever heard the words, listen to your gut, or what does your heart say? So we actually, our brain is logical. Our heart is the feeling part of it. And so it just feels right. And well, that is connected. There's thousands of neurons. They're very scientific. And so if you can listen to your intuition, that often can decipher the truth before your brain does. And then with your heart, same thing. Your gut can tell you yes or no. And I call it intuition. And so listen to that little voice in your head saying, go do this, don't do this. Like if you've ever been on a date with someone and you're like, I just don't have a good feeling about it. Listen to that, because there's not a good reason. And so you just stop questioning and just act. And that's a big thing that I learned.
Wow. So can you explain the metaphor of the iceberg and how it related to personal healing and relationship?
The method of the has method? Is that what you said?
Yeah, metaphor of the iceberg.
Oh, so the metaphor.
Yes.
Yep. So if you look at this little picture, 10% is above the water. And so when we meet somebody, and a good example in the American culture, we'll say, hi, how are you? And everyone goes, good. And then we're not really good. And so you put on what's called a facade. You put on this mask. And so the iceberg is the same thing. You only show people what you want them to see. And so the true person is what lies beneath the surface, which is about 90% of that person. So the goal is, if you flip the iceberg, now you're getting to know the person, and you can hike up a mountain much more than you can scuba dive to the bottom of an iceberg. So if you flip the iceberg, you can climb it, and now you can start uncovering the layers and getting to know a person. And so that's how I came up with that metaphor, is to get to know 90% of a person rather than the 10%. And the 10%, leave it for when you get married. It's going to be fine. Hopefully.
Wow, that's a great one. So what are the 15 steps healing from trauma that you discuss in your book? Can you mention them briefly?
Yeah, so there's two main steps. The first one is getting to know yourself and knowing who they are. And so you do that by finding the iceberg, then identifying your limiting beliefs. A lot of times we believe certain things because of what people have told us, and that's not true. And then you listen to your intuition, and then you make sure that you don't have pressure from other people. So someone's like, oh, I really think you should date this person. You don't need to date them if you don't want to, right? If your intuition tells you no, then don't go on the date. It's okay. You don't need to tell anyone yes. You don't need to feel pressured into it. And then you need to believe in your potential. We are all put on this earth. I believe God has put us on this earth to accomplish a certain mission in our lives. And yours is different than mine. And so making sure that you believe that you can achieve anything that you want. And then have intention. So everything that you do, if you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So having intention. And then codependency is a huge thing. So it's called non-attachment. So the acronym is FLIPPING. and then giving yourself grace. So that's the G in it. Step 2, which would be now knowing your partner. So the iceberg is the acronym. So looking beyond the first impression. So that's the I. Making a commitment is the C. Getting an education is the E. Spotting your baggage is the B. Setting your expectations, which would be the E. Recognizing abuse. A lot of times mental, it's not just physical abuse, it's mental, it's emotional. So if we can recognize if our partner is being abusive, then we can. And then understanding the importance of giving. And so those are the icebergs so that we can then summit the iceberg and enjoy the view.
Wow, thank you so much.
Mhm.
So, how do you recommend people to uncover the marks of the person they are dating?
Uncover the mask.
Yes.
There are so many steps. I actually give about 15 in the book. The first thing is, again, you find that the intuition, that's going to be your first thing. And listening to your loved ones. A lot of times you have this rosy, oh my gosh, they're so Mr. Wonderful or this or that. Like I had a 24-year-old daughter. She dated someone for 2 years. And we told her he's a really nice guy. We think he's great, but he's not for you. You're dating your dad, really, because he had the same exact personality. And so everything she loved about him, she hated about her dad. And so finally, and she knew that. She knew that she wasn't supposed to date him, but she could not let that go. And so getting to know them and then watching how they react to people and in certain situations. So I say you date the seasons, which would be a year, to try to get to know as much as you can about them. Watch how when they're driving, how do they talk to people that they don't know? How do are they constantly getting fired from their jobs or switching jobs? Are they the eternal victim? And so it's all these different things that you can start to see. And then quite frankly, what are they doing on their phones? Are they addicted to pornography? Are they addicted to games? Are they addicted to texting other people? And so trying to see as much as you can and uncover as much as you can. So there's numerous topics in the book that cover that.
Wow, that's great. So I want to digress a bit. How many copies of this book have you sold?
I have not checked. So it just came out a couple weeks ago. And then there's also a workbook that accompanies it. And so the workbook is kind of like a journal. And so the book it refers to, now go to your workbook, because I really want it to be a interactive. I don't want you to just read the book and not apply the principles. So I want you to go do it. So there's also a workbook that accompanies it. So it's newly out. I have not checked, and it's only been out for 2 weeks. So I need to go look.
So have you gotten any feedback from those that got the book?
I have. So people, they love it and they think it's a great concept. They think that the stories I give. So at the beginning of every chapter, I give a story. It's sometimes about me. It's sometimes about somebody I know, but I want people to kind of understand that concept and what we can take from it and then move into the concept.
Do you have any successful story of those couples that applied your method from flipping the iceberg?
So I teach several young women. I'm a volunteer, and so there's about 30 young women that every week we meet at least once, if not twice a week. And there's a thing called locus of control. And so that's a concept I talk about in my book. And locus of control is like if you make a T with your hands and you do the old Wonder Woman where you turn in a circle, she turns into Wonder Woman by twirling. I think it's hilarious. But that's how much locus of control we have in our lives. And so stop trying to change what you can't control and only change what you can. And so my girls loved that concept. And that's one of many that I teach.
Wow, that's great. So we just have a few questions to go, but I want you to tell us, are there some misconceptions about marriage that you want or that you aim your book should address?
So that's part 2. It's after the I do is what we're going to talk. That's the next book that I'm writing. And so this one's just the pre-marriage. But the misconception is I grew up watching a movie called Slipper and the Rose, and it was a Cinderella movie. And, they live happily ever after. So I went into marriage thinking that it's going to be happily ever after. I love this person. He loves me. He's my Ken. I'm his Barbie. And everything will be great. And we were on our honeymoon. And he got off the bus. And I said, we're in the wrong place. But I didn't want to be on the bus alone. So I got off the bus and we were in the wrong area. And so that was our first fight in marriage. And then we drove from Virginia, which is one side of the country, to Utah, which is almost the other side of the country. And we fought like crazy. And so I just remember thinking, oh, we have a great marriage. And so the misconception about marriage would be it takes work. And it's a constant up and down. And so I talk about that also in the book, that it can be a roller coaster. And so sometimes he's giving 100%, sometimes I'm giving 100%. We're never going to be giving 100% together, but together we can make 100%. And so continuing to be committed and working towards the relationship, those are the things that I wish that I would have understood better when I got married.
So let me go to the second to the list question. And I believe communication is one of the vital keys to build a healthy marriage. And I want you to, how important do you think communication is in building and maintaining healthy marriage, a healthy relationship?
Communication is everything. You have to be vulnerable. And I think that that's the hard part is, again, because of the experiences that I've had in my life and the experiences my husband has had in his life, communication is a tough thing. And so learning to be vulnerable with each other, that's a tough thing, because I'm very hard on myself, and I don't need my husband telling me all the things I do wrong to him, because I take that like, oh my gosh, I'm a good person. I would never mean that. And I don't mean that horribly, and I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to act like that. And so communication, we have to talk to each other. I talk about how you sit down in front of each other, and at the end of each night, what's something that's good? What's something that is bad? What's something that you'd like to change? And that's tough.
So let me add this to it before I bring up the last question. What are some of your top tips for effective conversation?
Personalize. So I feel this way. I'm feeling this, and trying not to put them on the defensive. That's the first thing, because and nobody wants to, again, say that you're a horrible person or you did this or that. And so they're going to take it wrong immediately. They will absolutely be on the defensive. Think about the message, and then also you can't change everything. Don't sweat the small stuff is the cliche that we talk about. And so is it really worth, in the grand scheme of things, talking about? So my husband, when he chews really loud, and I can't handle it. And so when sometimes I hear that, then I'll turn on the TV or I'll turn on the radio, or I'll just like sing a song in my head, because to me, it's not worth saying, will you stop chewing so loud? He can't change that. So it's not worth a conversation to bring up at all. And so it's just, think about, in the grand scheme of things, is this really worth the fight? Is this really worth the conversation?
Wow, thank you so much for coming on our show. And we want to say we are privileged to have a great woman with great idea on relationship, and a multifunctional woman. She's a woman that is talented. And though we are bringing it to the recording to an end, but before we go, I want you to tell us how do you believe your book and method can add value to our podcast audience?
So I really truly believe, after I have managed hundreds of people, I have taught thousands of people, I've been in a marriage, I've been out of a marriage, and I'm back in a marriage, and I'm almost as long as the first marriage. And so it's almost been 30 years of marriage. Plus, I've interviewed hundreds of people, and I've observed and I've watched. And I really, truly believe that we all struggle with the concepts that we talk about in this book. And I spent 2 years of my life really, and 5 years before that, talking about it. I really believe if you you take the concepts that are in the book and you apply them. You make sure that you're healed, and then you make sure that you know the person that you're getting ready to get married to, that you can have a lasting marriage. And one thing I did not include, I mean, I weaved it in, but you got to bring God into it. You know, God is at the top. You're on one side. It's like a triangle. You're on one side, your spouse is on the other. And if two people are committed to making it work, then you can make it work. My husband and I do not get along all the time. We're very different people. But because we're committed to the marriage, we're committed to our family, and we're committed to God, we are going to make it work. And that's, I think, what we need to remember.
Wow, thank you so much. I want to appreciate you once again, but before we go, I want you to let our audience know how they can reach you in order if they need your service, and how they can get your book. And please just give us this information.
Thank you. So CharisseWalker.com, Charissewalker, or FlippingTheIceberg.com. Either way, you can get the book.
Okay, so how they can you have a social media handle they can follow to listen to some of your free teachings?
Yep, at Charisse Walker, the number 1. So it's just Charisse Walker 1 for Instagram. And then it's Charisse Walker on Facebook. And I'm also on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So it's Charisse Walker. I try to make it as easy as possible for people.
Wow, that's great. Please subscribe to our teachings, subscribe and follow more to learn more. And I believe that after you definitely have a story to tell us about our teachings and testimonies to share. So I want to thank you, Charisse Walker, for coming on Season of Change once again. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for the opportunity given to us to ask you or to share to our audience about your book. And we believe that our audience will learn a great lesson from here. And once we get some feedback, we'll definitely send them to you so that we can definitely understand that truly you are impacting. Your impact in coming on our podcast is very great. So we really want to appreciate you once again. I will say thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So we'll be bringing this podcast to this recording to a stop. I will say this is Season of Change, transforming your life by the power in the Word of God. And we want to say thank you to our audience. Thank you to all our listeners. Thank you to all the fans of Charisse Walker that will listen to this podcast. And we want to say follow us also on Season of Change for more episodes. We have some great episodes still coming. We have a lot of guests. We are still bringing out professionals and people that are having great ideas on the field and what they are coming to discuss on this platform. You can follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and also on LinkedIn. It's Season of Change, transforming your life by the power of the Word of God. Season of Change podcast is the name, and I remain your host, Evangelist Joseph Jeremiah from Nigeria. Thank you so much. God bless you, Charisse Walker. Stay blessed and stay connected always. So I believe once we call upon you again to be on this podcast, you will give us your yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. So,
thank you.
Yeah.